Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for having me here. Just barely made it from Washington in lovely traffic, but I'm glad to answer any questions throughout. Since we're a small group, I'll try to make this a little bit more informal. I do have a lot of slides, basically just to go over the program as a whole, so you have an understanding of a million acronyms that I'll throw out throughout the presentation. Don't be deterred to stop and ask me, what does that mean? So yeah, I actually work with the East Asia Pacific Rim region. That's my forte and my background. So if anyone's particularly interested in going to any of the 17 countries in the region, please let me know. But I'm also open to answering questions from my colleagues that work with the other areas of the program as well. Let's see if this works. This basically just shows you. I'm just going to be giving an overview and also speaking on for this presentation, I included visiting scholars. I'll gloss over just briefly in case you do have colleagues that you know that you work with overseas who you'd like to sponsor to have come here for a certain amount of time. We also offer grant opportunities for them as well. So the history of the Fulbright Scholar Program, I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but it is a program that's been in existence now for over 65 years, since 1948. Founded by Senator Fulbright, who actually came up with the idea partly because he himself was a Rhodes Scholar to the United Kingdom early in his career and was inspired by his experience in the UK to realize the importance of international exchange in the higher education fields. So from actual war money from leftover iron scraps after World War II, they took the money from the funds and actually created the program to do exchanges. So interestingly enough, amazing things can happen in Washington. Since that time period, this is kind of the breakdown of who are Fulbrighters, just showing roughly that we've had 122,000 Americans and about 202,000 from abroad in the exchange. So it's not an equal ratio. We're trying to work on increasing more Americans going abroad. That's part of our new initiative, particularly in the next coming years on promoting. But as you can see, it's a bit intimidating at first when you see that we've had heads of state and MacArthur Foundation fellows, but what's interesting about the program and how it's evolving is that we're also now considering more opportunities for all stages of your career. We're going to be introducing, actually, next week for the first time, a new postdoc program, so stay tuned for more information on that for any of your research students or anyone that you know that would be eligible in the postdoc category. It's an interesting initiative that we're hoping to have. Right now it's just a pilot, but we're hoping in the next 5 years to further develop it. Oh, it has pretty graphics, I forgot about. So, as I indicated, I work in the East Asia Pacific region, but we operate in 155 countries in total. The Fulbright program, it's often, everyone says I'm a Fulbright Scholar, they hear the word Fulbright Scholar. It's pretty synonymous with many of our different types of Fulbright programs. So today I'm going to go over the core, which is the initial, I think everybody is more familiar with the core. It's more of a 5-month to 10-month term grant, whereas other types of Fulbright initiatives that you could also consider as a specialist program, we call it, is shorter term that could be from 4 to 6 weeks in length. So those two areas I'll talk about in detail, but we also have the Fulbright Hays, which is actually run by the Department of Education, the Teacher Exchange, which is for primary school level exchange, the Administrator Program, which I'll actually have a workshop tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., bring your coffee. I'll be happy to talk with you. If you can convince your administrators to come, please do, as well as the Student Program. So I put this up here in the screen. This is actually one of my recent scholars that just came back from Cambodia, because it's something, especially, I know when you're looking at how do you explain your interest, how do you explain your passions, how does it relate in your application. When you have a limited space, it can be very challenging. So I'll go over the application a little later, but one of the things to bear in mind when you are writing your proposals is this is a State Department funded program. For promoting public diplomacy, cultural exchange. So how does your work, your passions, your interests in your field, how does this relate? Keeping that in mind when you're writing your proposals is key. So I just put this up to bear this in mind when you're planning out your planned activities, that it's also about collaboration, about working with your colleagues overseas and how you can bring back those experiences and benefit your home institution as well. So as I indicated before, the core is traditionally actually 2 to 12 months for East Asia Pacific. We only do 10 months. Grants are available to support teaching and research, or pure research, depending on the country award. And I'll show you my website later on, but where you can find a catalog that's available to read through by country, by award. You can do enhanced searches now that I think it has changed recently with a new website to help you better narrow down of what fits your needs. So if you're looking strictly for research, if you have a PhD in a particular area, it'll show you what countries are interested or willing to consider your application in that area. Some of the basic requirements, you must be a U.S. citizen at the time of application. So if you're naturalizing, so long as you're naturalizing by the time of application, you're eligible. PhD or other terminal degrees are required depending on the country award. And specifically for lecturing grants, the average requested years of university teaching experience is 3 years. This fluctuates, and that's why you have to really be careful when you're reading the award description. Some of them now are changing. There's an evolution, as I indicated, with postdoc opportunities, but now early career as well. So some of these requirements are not as strict in some countries as others. Also for research, since you're going to be in the field, it's expected that you do have a certain level of proficiency in the language that you're going to, just to prove feasibility and actually getting your work done successfully.
Yeah. Is that really a requirement? Because let's say we go to a university in Rome and everyone will speak English. So the class might be even taught in English. Would that be a requirement in that case?
Right. So looking carefully at the country award that you're applying for, they'll say if it's required or not. Okay. They'll say they'll have a preference for it. So it's helpful that you know, but it's not a requirement, so it won't mark you as ineligible in those cases. Where there is lax language, where is it not strictly required, it is important though to mention in your project statement that you will be working with colleagues that are English native speakers, that you will have a translator available. Just some way to show, explain to the peer reviewers that you're going to get it done. Don't just assume that they know. Because you are having, for your application when you submit it, and I'll go through that later on, there is a peer review process where it's reviewed first by folks within your discipline, and then secondly, in a broader scale from folks that are alumni that have been in that country. So you're realizing that you're speaking to broad audiences as well as audiences that know your area. So it's a careful balance. So I mentioned the catalog. This is the web link that you can go to. You can do a keyword search. I just put this as an example because my last workshop was for pharmacists. And you can decide what your activity was. You can narrow it down to that level and carefully read through the award requirements. In some areas you'll see where it says it's recommended that you speak to CIES staff. That's folks like myself. I work with the Council for the International Exchange of Scholars, CIES. We actually administer on behalf of the State Department the Fulbright program, so your questions won't be directed at State Department officials. They'll go through us to help you along the way with the application. And I'll have my contact information up too. What are the benefits? So with your grant award description, you'll see at the bottom of the catalog, it'll list out what are the average award amounts that you can expect to have allocated to you on a monthly basis. So it's an average taken from last year's budget period. There may be slight adjustments made to the next year cycle, but it's to give you an approximation. Usually it's fairly close, it doesn't differ. But you do get a base stipend to cover basic activities, a living allowance, housing, one-time travel lump payment that you'll get 1 month ahead before you depart to your country of destination for both round-trip airfare. So it's all included in one lump. If you're bringing family members as well, we'll cover dependent travel so long as they're with you during your grant period for about 80% of the time. So we do support families. Keep it in mind, I know it can be difficult. We also have tuition allowances in some countries that's really important, like China, where it can cost for an international school $30,000 a year. So we offer subsidization for dependents as well in most cases. Some of our programs, again, I have a bias here on my slides because of my region. We offer, in addition to having the opportunity to spend time in the country that you're interested in, additional travel to other countries in our program during your grant period. For East Asia Pacific, for example, we have 2 different regional travel pots, we call it. So once you're on your grant, you can apply either through the U.S. Embassy in country or a commission, if there's one established for the Fulbright program, to see if you could spend about 3 to 10 days as a short-term stay program in another country. So to show evidence that would help strengthen the work that you're doing, if there's comparative studies or collaborative efforts between countries. I just had a faculty member actually go between Thailand. She had a grant to Thailand, but part of her work, it was in public health. She wanted to also study in Burma. So through the grant additional regional travel program, she was able to go for 10 days to Burma to study as well. So these types of opportunities are available, and we can go into more detail if you like later about them. So it's not just limited to the one country you apply to. I don't know how many have ever looked at applying before. Anyone ever looked at the application itself?
Yeah, Dr. Mullins actually won a grant, so she's going to be
Okay.
traveling
I'm
in
going
the
to China in 2013.
Oh,
2015. Sorry. I'm going to China in next
do
year,
research?
2015, to do research and teaching,
okay.
and to do what they call tags, and that's not come up here, but additional keynotes at different universities.
Right.
So I'll be at Southwest University for the month, but Fulbright includes the travel time as part of the grant,
Yes.
and then there are the tags at the different universities.
Yeah, so each country has its own little additional perk. You can do guest lecturing around the country. It's not just with the host institution. So, yes,
But you have
that's
to
it.
negotiate it.
Right.
That's a lot of emails.
With the host institution or the embassy?
Fulbright office.
Okay. Okay.
Are these Fulbright programs one country specific? For example, do you give guest lectures in neighboring countries?
Okay, so when you apply for the award, you have to pick one country of interest. And one of the key points in your application, that's relating back to my original slide about personal attributes of what type of promotion of public diplomacy would you exhibit in your work. It's important that you have a keen interest in a particular country, that your work will benefit that one particular country. In your application, you can indicate we have an area where you can put alternate countries of interest that your work would bear equal benefits to. And what that will mean is that when your application is reviewed by the primary country you are applying for a variety of reasons, if they cannot take you for that academic program, mainly because of funding or something of that nature, then we look at the alternate choices that you had listed, and then reach out my job would it be to then reach out to those other countries to see if they would be willing to review your application to receive funding from them instead as an alternative. And I would engage with you and try to modify your original application to fit the alternate country. But, yeah.
Is it country specific or institution specific? Like, if I'm applying for a country, I understand that I need an institution that invites me in that country.
Right.
So how does one determine so the benefit is to the institution that is inviting the scholar or to the country broadly speaking? Because the institution might be a research program that is not necessarily,
Okay.
nation-based, but.
Right. So, yes, you're good. You're jumping the gun on a couple of things. Okay. So, again, there's a variety of requirements. So one of the requirements that you're talking about is whether or not you need a host institution to support your teaching or research. Some countries require it, some don't. Some do not, absolutely do not want you to reach out to any university. For example, I have Burma as an example. They are state-run schools. The U.S. Embassy has to intervene and work with that state government on assigning you an affiliation. So you absolutely cannot have an engagement letter in advance in that particular instance. Other countries like Australia make it mandatory that you have a letter. When you're writing your statement, it could have multiple applications of benefit. You're working, I say like the onion, you're peeling it back. So you have the broad scale of how it benefits the United States and that country that you're interested in. So you're looking at big picture benefits. But peel it back another layer, you're looking at how directly is it impacting that institution that you're working with, if you have a particular one in mind, or where it is a requirement. And then take it next level, how is it benefiting when you come back to the United States? What are you doing to continue in the long term beyond the term of your grant? So thinking in those different spheres, and your project statement, because it's 5 pages long, is very key. And I know it can be tricky. I've had applicants especially that are particularly in STEM fields that are not as comfortable taking that larger picture analysis of their work. They're very much in the weeds. So I have to work very carefully with them to explain that you're reaching an audience that may not necessarily understand why that is so important in that mathematical equation, for example. What's the real, the harder picture to explain of what's the real application in a larger term. Doing both in your application. So get into the weeds a little bit on the details so that you're appealing to the folks that are reading that are in your area and that you're credible, that they know that the work you're doing is legitimate, but also take a step back and talk about, well, how is this going to help with promoting sciences exchange between the countries? How is this going to set up institutional support between the universities and build larger term exchange programs? I'm just using these as references, but that's mainly the gist that we're going on here, what we're looking for in candidates when they apply. So these are all good questions, and I'm sorry for dumping a lot of information at once. But if it does require, if an award, a country is looking for you to have established relationships, this is the conundrum, right? We're looking for folks in some instances that have never been to this country. It's their first exposure. So how is it then that we require you to also have a host letter? Sometimes in some countries that can be a challenge. So we ask you to contact us for advisement. We can try to a certain extent to give you contacts of alum who have gone to that country and have worked with specific institutions that are familiar at Fulbright that would be interested in supporting you. Also doing your own research with your home institution, seeing who on campus is from that country that could possibly give you ideas of home institutions that they know back when they return that they could help provide information on. We also, as I indicated before, have commissions. Commissions are set up on a binational level to support Fulbright programs within that country. So Australia just celebrated 65 years having a commission in place. They contribute half of the funding for the Fulbright program between the United States and Australia. They have a commission established where they have a mix of both U.S. and Australian staff support. So they can be an excellent source to contact if you're having troubles with securing an affiliation with an institution there. They can have a directory. They have a great website that you can look at. These are just ways of thinking if you're not familiar, if you really have a passion for a country but never been there and you don't know anyone there that could support you. These are ways that you can try to go about writing to them in advance. I usually say that the application process starts way in advance of the actual deadline, which every year is August 1 for the core program. And we encourage you as the first steps to do these letters of invitations as you prepare, because it can take time to develop those relations and get those letters in. The second part I usually recommend is for the reference letters. You need a required 3 letters of reference. And these letters can come from, you want to diversify who these folks are. You want to have someone who you currently work with that can speak on your behalf on your teaching ability or the research that you're doing. You also want to have someone who's a supervisor level or someone that you've worked with in the capacity that's overseeing your work, and also removed from your institution. You want an outside perspective, someone who can speak on your behalf and more on a personal character level as well, showing that you have you're culturally open-minded or that you're willing, that you're enthusiastic about the work that you're doing, something of that nature. So diversification of your references, thinking about that ahead of your application or key. I mentioned the August 1 deadline to submit. What happens after that? This is actually a little skewed. We're actually trying to accelerate the whole process. It's our initiative this year. So August 1's the deadline. I and my staff do a technical review immediately following, and we'll have correspondences to make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted in your application. And then once you receive that notification from us that looks clean, looks great, it's going to start going through a peer review process that I mentioned before at the discipline level first, and then at a regional level. And we convene the regional committees in Washington, D.C. to have a full day conversation about your application and whether or not they're going to put it forward then to the country for the next stage, which is the in-country review. And that can take place, this year we're trying to get done all of the U.S. review period by November 15th. And then from November 15th onward, it's up to the countries, either the U.S. embassies or the commissions. They have selection committees there to review. Ideally speaking, we get official final notifications from the countries by March. But of course, as I'm sure you all know, budget circumstances with governments don't always arrive on time, so there can be delays. So anywhere we try to give some wiggle room here, from March to as late as honestly May, you could receive notification. So just keeping that in mind of the time frame that we're talking about, you're thinking always a year ahead of time. I think 3 years actually. I'm working with programs from last year, the current year, and the next year after. So. Do I have, before I go into the specialist program, any other questions though about the core? And we'll have plenty of Q&A too at the end.
So, well, I was wondering about the discipline review. So who are these people? Are they other researchers at university folks? Are they business people? Who combination? Does it matter on the depend on the discipline? Or?
So it's become a very complex, as Fulbright has grown in the fields of allowing different types of fields, particularly we've grown in the hard sciences recently in the past 10 years. We are traditionally a social sciences humanities program. that now is supporting STEM work. So we've had to diversify our pool of reviewers as well. So our discipline reviewers are not necessarily alum, but are experts in the fields, and we have usually broken down to subfield level as well. So we can have, for example, folks in law. We'll have maybe 6 or 7 different discipline committees for law, but within those subcommittees, they're specializing in commercial or economic law. Another one that's in environmental law, both practitioners and academics. So we have it broken down to that molecular level. Similarly in the sciences as well. It's on a voluntary basis that we receive these reviewers, so it's always an endeavor for recruitment. But we have several hundred reviewers at the discipline level. And then at the regional level, we take Fulbright alum that have been specifically to the country or region that you're applying to. And they span, we try to diversify, that's the key for when we're setting up these committees each year, is that they represent a variety of different disciplines, a variety of both applied and academic backgrounds. But the unification is that they've spent considerable time in those countries because they're looking at it from a different perspective. They're looking at it on your fit and also feasibility of on-the-ground work in the country that the discipline level would not have that knowledge of. So it's pretty thorough.
So the government of the recipient country does have a say in the process? I mean, who decides on the side of the recipients, or do they decide as well?
Okay, so the U.S. Embassy, if there's an embassy, for some of our smaller programs, it's only embassy run. Interestingly enough, and again, I'm biased here in my region, China is run by a U.S. embassy, not a commission. Not yet, anyway. Give it a couple more years. So the U.S. Embassy will review candidates, and they will have their own selection committee, which will comprise of members from the Ministry of Education from China as well. So, and they'll also have sometimes visiting alum serving on there. So it can be a diverse mix. It's kind of at their own jurisdiction, each country, of how they want to shape their selection committee. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not just the government from that country reviewing it all. These are stakeholders within the program. And then once that country reviews, though, it has to come back for final blessing, so to speak, from the State Department for final approval. And we have a Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board. So that are appointed, those positions are appointed, they are, I think a council of 12, I get my numbers right, I believe there are 12 of them, that do final approval, and you'll get a letter from the board when you're selected. But the main review periods are between the U.S. peer review side and then the in-country review either by the commission or U.S. Embassy appointed selection committee.
First of all, about China, I found that I need to go through approval in terms of 2 different embassies in China. The Southwest University sits in a region that borders 2 different embassies, so I had to get clearance and approval from 2 different embassies in China. And I learned from the Fulbright office that sometimes that can happen, so that's something to keep in mind. And I did want to ask about the additional enrichment opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
If a Fulbright Specialist Award is approved for 1 month, is there a way to have that extended through the Fulbright office only in Washington for another week or 2, and that be called a Fulbright? Or if it's approved for the 1 month only, is everything after that a non-Fulbright?
That's why I looked at you funny. You're on a specialist grant? That's why, okay, I do court. That's what I was looking at. I was like, I'm not familiar with application. Okay, so specialists, I'll go into that detail in a second. I'm just going to dive into it. But similarly, if for some reason something happens where you have a 6-month grant, 4 months into the grant, you foresee that you're not going to achieve your goal. You're not going to be able to complete your work, and you need more time. There is possibilities for extending request for an extension, but it's on a case by case. You have to give us valid reasons, you have to explain, and we also have to see if we have the funding to do so. So it's a combination. You have to, but there are possibilities for getting extensions. And you would put that request in. So for countries where there's a commission, you would write to the commission as well as to us, to CIES. So basically, we introduce you to our family, and on your email correspondence, you're going to see lots of CCs from all the folks that are involved in the program, both on the U.S. side and in the country. So it's helpful to just keep everyone involved informed. But depending on if it's a post country, that funding would come technically directly from the State Department, whereas in a commission country, that money is coming from commission funds. So for China, for example, that would come from the State Department funds. So you would have to request it to the embassy and CIS, and ECA would have to review if they have funds to extend out your grant for that year.
The easier way is just not to do it as part of the Fulbright.
If you have that opportunity, yes. Mm-hmm. But I think there's no harm in asking.
Mm-hmm. I have been. They said different things. Makes sense.
Research in China is a whole nother. It's a whole nother animal because of permits. You'll see with some countries where there's, in addition, work permits that you need to obtain, and that's where our counterparts in country are very helpful on making sure you procure the right paperwork necessary. With China, sometimes there can be more delays of getting the proper permits. There's a tuition fee that they call it tuition. I don't know why, but so that you could get the opportunity to do research. That's for our core when they're there for an extended period of time that we have to pay. So the Fulbright program will pay on top as part of your grant. So each country has its own thing. So it's hard to make it very uniform, different needs. Do you have any other questions though so far? So good? Helpful, not helpful? It's after lunch and I feel like everyone's nap time is starting. Specialist program that I mentioned is a little bit of a different animal. It's a shorter term grant period, so that's I think it's more convenient oftentimes for folks that can't take that time off at their university. The difference though, and there's a big difference, is that this is a roster system. So so what you would do is you would apply based on your expertise. You would basically be submitting a summarized version of your CV, as well as a very brief personal statement explaining what you could provide, what kind of qualities, what expertise, what type of experience could you provide an institution. At the same time, on the other side, the institutions also need to apply to this program. They need to submit a project request for funds. It's kind of a matchmaking system. So if you have a particular institution in mind, I'd say be very careful on thinking that you're going to get what you want, because it doesn't necessarily work that way. You get on a roster. If we see, you get approved when you apply to get on a roster for 5 years. Cool thing about it is that you'll then have institutions from all over the world write to you if they see that they're interested. They have a project that looks like you could fit very well with. They'll write to you with interest, and that's where the support and the specialist program would kick in. So the State Department would support up to 6 weeks of time for you to work on this institution's project, and you would be given a daily stipend. I think it's $200 a day. Yeah. And the institution would also get, would lend support. Part of the thing is that they would also provide just basic living allowances, or if accommodations during your time there would be provided for by the institution. And they receive separate funds too from State Department.
So if you're on this roster for 5 years, can you go do it repeatedly within that 5-year period, or is there other limits that way?
I think it depends. I don't think there's a limitation. I think that I've seen specialists called up twice in 1 year for a project. So yes, it is possible.
Because on the main one, have to go a couple years off, right, once you get one core,
Okay,
core grants?
so no, there's no limitation anymore for either program. I know what you're talking about. The lifetime limit, we called it, has been lifted. So you can
I mean the
apply.
lifetime limit, there was one, I did one back in 1999.
Okay,
I thought it was like 2 years or something, you couldn't do that one. They lifted that one, the limit?
there's no limit. You can't do, so between the specialist and the core, so if you get a specialist grant, you can also do, you can also apply for a core at the same time. You can apply to both programs. You can't apply for more than one grant though within one program at a time, but you can apply for both programs. And if you do get called up to do the specialist program, it is possible that later on, depending on how it falls in the cycle, that you can also do a core within the same academic year if you're selected. So you can do both in 1 year. And you can also, we've seen some folks that are very eager, they're still on their Fulbright grant and they're applying for another one for the next year. We've seen that. But please keep in mind, of course, that we try to base this on equity here, that if you've had the opportunity to have a Fulbright before, you need to have extra justification the next time you apply around for why you can get additional support again. We are placing preference on those that have never had the opportunity, so it will be even more competitive for you to get another Fulbright grant. But we don't prevent you from doing it.
So the specialist, then is a 5-year cycle? And is there a deadline, like do you have August 1st to apply for the core once you become, or is it open?
Okay, so just to go really quickly, this is basically all of the different fields that are covered within specialist program at the moment. Not all are represented at this time, not sure why, but for now these are the limited areas where we will support for specialists. The deadlines though, this will just go, it's probably 2 slides after, but to answer your question right now, we have 6 deadlines for the specialist program. So it's almost on a rolling basis that we accept your applications for. Usually there's a 1-month turnaround time from when you apply to when you find out if you're selected. So it's very quick. But the time period for when you can get called up to do a project though is unknown. It's really depending on how specific your area is and matching up with an institution that at the time is looking for support. But it's a nice an option to have in mind and to be able to take advantage of should you have a good match met. Sometimes it can be as fast as a month. I've had someone get the selection letter and boom, they had an institution knocking on their door asking for them to do this project. So it can be very fast turnaround time too. Depends on the situation. But it's a good option to explore, and to keep in mind that you can do this and still apply for a core. And as I was mentioning though, it has a different application. I was saying from earlier where the core, you're writing a project statement specifically for activities that you're going to carry out in the country. This is different. This is just advertising your area of expertise, your background, and how you contribute overseas. So it's not specifically writing for one institution, and may not necessarily be for one particular country either. You can have a broad area of expertise that could lend assistance to multiple countries. So that's acceptable. I indicated this earlier with the STEM field because this is new. Particularly for STEM education, there's a great demand now for, this is an increasing area of that's interesting to look at with what countries now are emphasizing curriculum development and teaching initiatives for STEM fields, particularly in the specialist program. So that's a new initiative that, particularly when you're looking at our program, you can see what countries are highlighting STEM field as a preference. So particularly, this is all for visiting. I'm just going to briefly go through this, but if you do have anyone that's interested in applying from another country to come to the United States to teach or to do research, here feel free to ask me questions and I'd be happy to answer them, but I just had these built in for another workshop that I've had. It's also, we have very brief programs, so some universities cannot support visiting lecturers for a full semester or a year. We offer, and I have some flyers in the back too on it, something called an occasional lecturer fund. So we would support scholars to come to your university to teach for a short period, to do just brief lectures or workshops. So that's a nice way to internationalize your programs on a dime. That was really it. That was just a very brief way of going through the whole entire program. But just in essence, though, to know the characters, as I had mentioned, CIES, we work in Washington, D.C. for the faculty and the administrator programs. The student program is operated in New York by the Institute of International Education. I work as a division of that. And that is a nonprofit that is supported by funding from the State Department for Fulbright. So Fulbright program is funded by State Department, but we do the administration soup to nuts. So if you do have questions on your application, any issues with anything along the way with your grant once you receive it, you would speak with my staff in Washington, D.C. If you have students that just received a Fulbright, they would speak with staff that are in New York. The August 1 deadline obviously just passed, but for 2016-17, we will be launching as of February 1 the catalog. We usually send announcements out to faculty advisors on campus, and also if you're interested on the CIES.org website, there's something called My Fulbright that you can sign up for, where we will then send you announcements and notifications on information throughout the academic year of new programs or new deadlines that are coming up, like that postdoc opportunity. That's a new program that we'll announce next week that will have a deadline of it's October 13th, January 15th. So it's unique. It's only a 3-month window. But for the core, it's from February 1 technically to August 1 that we accept applications. Usually though, from what I've heard from applicants, is that the average time span that it takes faculty to prepare for a core grant can be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Granted, we have those that are for just 1 year, but that was an interesting statistic we just ran actually on their last pool of candidates, that they had told us 2 to 5 years was about the average time span for preparing. So I know there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just simply one day you wake up and say, I'm going to go to India for a year to research. That yes, there's a lot of different variables, and we're trying to work the program so that there are added incentives for you. So something that's a new initiative right now for teaching opportunities, to support teaching particularly, we have something called a salary supplement that we're kicking in. It just was piloted for 14-15, but now we are guaranteed that it's going to have, it's going to be funded again for 15-16 and 16-17, so that's good. And basically what that is to ensure that there's no gap in your income that you would earn normally at your university, that there would be a steady flow. It would still kick in a certain amount additional to our standard stipend that you'll see in the award. So if you do the math and you tally it up from what we give you monthly, and you see that there's a difference from what you actually earn monthly, and you're applying for a lecturing award, provided you give us your annual income statement from your university, we'll then adjust and kick in what we call a salary supplement to make up for the difference. So this is a new initiative to help support faculty that teaching is a very valued activity for countries around the world. They really are looking more for teaching opportunities over research now for funding support than before. This is one way we're trying to help that happen.
What is the success rate and what are the main reasons for rejection?
Success rate. It varies by award. So when you're looking at our catalog, you'll see there are awards called all discipline awards. Be careful what you read. Some of them then, if you read down a little bit further, they're saying preference though for the following fields. So they will allow anybody to apply outside of those preferences. But keeping in mind, they're looking specifically, they're indicating these are, if we do get high caliber candidates in these fields, our preference will be to pick them. It's hard for me to say holistically for the worldwide program how competitive, but for certain countries you'll see, it'll say up to a certain amount of grants supported. If you see that there's an award that's specifically written just for one field, one area, and there's only one grant, do not be deterred. It's amazing sometimes, you know, some folks would be surprised, I guess, if they look to see what, we don't disclose numbers for a reason, because there's so many different variables that are coming into effect. We can have a tremendous amount of applications to one country, a small pool of grants, but if half of those candidates that year are low quality, you know, and you're applying in a preference field, that ups your chances that year. But the following year could be a totally different scenario. So I can't ever tell folks like, oh, you've got a 1 in 10 shot of getting it. I have no idea. I've seen folks that I thought were excellent candidates get forwarded to the country for review and then not get selected. I never get an explanation. The United States, by the way, we don't get an explanation of why, per se, because they have their own factors that they look at as well that we don't know. They could have, we're always trying to gauge, and that's why it's important when we launch the catalog each year, the subtle changes that we're making are from our communications with those countries. What we're trying to do is gauge from the universities there, who are you looking for? Are you really looking for a senior lecturer, or do you want someone that's more junior, that's gonna roll up their sleeves and teach a tremendous amount of hours in the classroom? What's the capacity levels like? There's this constant back and forth that's going on that our counterparts at the embassies as well try to help liaise with us on here in Washington to try to get that information and convey it into the award so that there's fair opportunity. Don't be deterred when you see that there's only up to one grant and specifically looking for someone that's an art historian in American art between 18th and 19th century. That's very focused. So the chances that you're going to get many people in that area that have the opportunity to take sabbatical or whatever to do that, narrow. So think about that.
May I add a point? Something I learned along the way that was helpful is our academic calendars in the U.S. don't necessarily fit with academic calendars around the world. So I was thrilled to learn that China has a full and robust academic calendar to the very end of June, unlike us. So while going there in June, they're fully in operation. You know, we're here in our sandals and our shorts, right? And they're not. So you might want to keep in mind academic calendars.
Yeah, absolutely. And Southeast Asia just made an initiative to actually have conformity with the Western academic calendar. Just recently, Thailand and all of them just made moves to adjust their calendar so that it starts September and ends in June as uniform for the whole Southeast Asia. That was a big change for them.
When will that start? Because it's not this upcoming year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still approved to go in June.
No, not China. It's Southeast.
Oh, you said
Southeast Asia. Is this
Got you.
Thailand, Philippines,
Got you.
Malaysia? It's part ASEAN. It's part of an initiative to get their uniform education.
That's important.
Veronica, I just wanted to mention, since you mentioned sabbatical, which here at Virginia Tech we call research leave, one of the things that has been tricky for people to navigate is trying to think about planning for application or this type of award and lining that up with a request for research leave, which is not necessary because we have the provision in our faculty handbook for an additional type of leave called special leave, which is able to be approved through the Provost's office outside of selection and approval for research leave. so that's helpful for a number of reasons. It doesn't require the amount of planning through departments, college, and ultimately up to the board of visitors to be approved way in advance, and so that can be difficult to juggle the timelines. And is also more flexible in terms of timing, where research leave is typically considered in semesters and academic years. If you're looking at something that's different or more flexible, this suits that better as well. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about potential planning, that it does not have to go through the research leave process and approvals.
And we also are at the same time seeing this as a larger trend. We have something now called a flexible research option that, again, you have to kind of see it's not for all. It's only some countries that will allow it, where you can spread out your research, and this is of value, I think, for some areas more than others, over a 2 to 3 year time span. So you can take, like, so your first year you could do a minimum of 1 month to 3 months of your grant, and break it up then, if you have a total 9-month grant, into 3-month chunks over the course of 3 years. So you can have that type of flexibility as well. So if you're doing longitudinal studies, maybe this is helpful for you. Some food for thought. But that's a new thing that just came out last year's cycle that we're going to continue. And again, no, not all countries buy into this because of the visa complications, etc. They don't allow it. So, but some do.
So is it an asset or a liability to be already connected with the country and some institutions?
I hate saying this again, it's depending on the country. It's, so if I noticed the tendency is in more developing countries, there's a tendency, if you're going to do field work that's more in a remote location, preference that you have prior experience out in the field can be of a benefit, right? That means that there would be less need for having additional support on the ground to make sure that you're going to feasibly carry out your work, right? So in that instance, it can be a benefit. So it really depends on what you're looking to do and where you're looking to do it, if it's a benefit or not. And that's really that's why we have reviewers that had experience in that country. That's why when we forward the application to that country, that's part of the factors that they're looking at. So it can be a help in some countries where there's less support on the ground, like Cambodia. I have to use my region as an example. That's where that prior experience is a benefit. Whereas like in the United Kingdom, not so much. Where if you hadn't spent a lot of time there, it's not as beneficial. So it's dependent. I can get specific questions too, I don't mind. I can translate it.
How do you handle situations of countries where the politics are volatile, and particularly when those changes happen quickly?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a coordination system, and I mentioned that family structure, it's for a reason. We've had, for example, martial law in Thailand recently. And some of our scholars were in an area where there were a lot of protests going on, university closures. So the U.S. Embassy is very much aware. We ask that all Fulbright grantees, before they arrive in country, actually register with their embassy. So that way we can monitor the situation and work constantly in communication. That's key. We've had programs, unfortunately, suspended because of volatile activities, like in the Middle East. Right now, our Pakistan program is active. It had been on the edge for a little while, but it's going to continue forth. Afghanistan will continue. Libya, though, will be closed next year. It's hit or miss. We try to work at all costs, so long as that embassy is open, the Fulbright program is alive. That's how we usually run it. Unless there's a particular incident, knock on wood, we haven't had in a very long time. We've always had Fulbrighters still on the ground.
So I'm just curious, Russia would be one example,
Okay.
which the United States government now has imposed sanctions on. but we still have diplomatic relations. So do you still have Fulbright scholars
Absolutely.
there? And
Absolutely.
people can still apply
Yes.
to go there? Okay.
This is it's a nonpartisan program. That's why it's set up, this is part of the historical roots of Fulbright, of why it was created. And that's something that we vehemently feel should be maintained. So long as the embassy is operating, we will allow Fulbright grantees on the ground. Sometimes we have to work overtime for that, like our Iraqi scholars recently.
Can you talk a little bit about, for folks who might be considering an application for the next year, what are the best things for people to be doing between now and February, say, when that catalog comes out?
So it depends on where your interests are. If you have a desire to go abroad, but you're not particularly sure what country, all right? Now's the time to start researching into the countries, looking at, are they interested in me? Taking a look at the awards catalog now. Even though it's from last year's program, like I said, usually the modifications are very minor. So take a look, see where the preferences are. Even if there aren't, but if you're very focused on a particular country and you're an area expert, and then the next step I would say is engaging with the host institution if it's required in the award. Right now, start talking with them, seeing if they're interested. Start planning out, projecting what type of activities you'd like to do. Think out of the box. Don't think just teaching 2 to 3 classes a day or excuse me, a week. Think more about what type of guest lecturing you can do. What other institutions could you visit while you're there? If you're doing a combination or if you're doing strictly research, establishing the relations in that country again. Start setting the parameters, getting them aware that you're interested, that you're going to go, how will they support you, what will you do, so that when it comes time to writing it all up, it's solid. You have letters of invitation that are very detailed, very enthusiastic. They've been working with you now for several months, and they want you. Those are initial, I would say, steps to take right now. Also, consulting, again, you can consult with us if it's very specific to that country or an area. Talk with the staff at CIS. Like I said, we're kind of the liaison talking with our U.S. embassy counterparts and commission counterparts in the field. So if you do have something that's very specific as far as family needs or health concerns, whatever it is, let us know now and we can work with you and see what kind of accommodations can be met. And then the project statement, always feel free to let other people read your drafts over and over. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people not spell check. Come on, and they're brilliant. So just be very thorough and making sure that you have everything looking perfect for you.
Do you recommend that institutions have their own kind of pre-submission review committee to go over applications like?
Ooh, for faculty?
Yeah.
Why not? If you know alum as well, Fulbright alum, or if you know just in general faculty that have been in that country recently, to talk to and to ask them to review what you're writing, they'll probably say you should point out, something trivial that you may have not thought of, about the feasibility to get to this destination. If you're going to be based here, how will you set that up? Some detail that you may have not thought of that they may point out to you. I think that's helpful. Absolutely.
I think often we don't even realize people are applying for those until we've heard that they've been awarded. So
Yeah.
if you could offer any kind of support prior to
Sure.
submission, that would really be great.
Yeah. Sure.
I'd like to go back to, by the way, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's very helpful and informative. I really enjoyed listening to that.
Great.
I would like to revisit this difference between the core program and this specialist program. What I'm hearing from you is that at least for the core program, there should be like reciprocity, meaning the professionals, the faculty and the researchers from the United States provided their expertise to the country that they are going to visit and spend some time, but please make sure to in the application, make sure to mention what you are going to bring back to the States.
Absolutely.
And also to the home institution.
Very much.
Institute.
Yes.
But I don't hear that much that aspect when it comes to this specialist program. So if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes telling us, I mean, it sounds like this university, this specialist program is like just providing our expertise to the rest of the world. But what is expected for the specialist to bring back? Is there a difference or?
No, so that's a good question. For the specialists, I think there's equal emphasis, and I apologize if I screwed it that there's more on the core. There's equal emphasis on when you're returning from the specialist program as well, what kind of continued engagement will you have with that institution that you're working with. I think the expectations, though, because it's a shorter term program, are that there's some things that are more practical, more immediate that you can do. So if you're working particularly with a team there, how will you continue to collaborate with each other? As opposed to if you're long-term on a grant for 9 months, the expectation would be that you would have more established relations, more ties with the administration there to help develop, for example, a new exchange program or new long-term project between institutions that you've got your administrators signed up and interested in supporting this continued relationship with that institution. So again, it's the level of engagement that maybe is slightly different between both, but still the basis of showing that you're thinking this way for both programs is important. Yeah.
Following up on that, in terms of the specialist programs in particular, how are the scheduling issues, or what are the scheduling issues involving them in terms of the regular ones? It sounds like they usually kind of line up with regular academic terms. With the shorter term specialist ones, they try to have them over summers, or they kind of, how do people work out their shorter term, and someone otherwise might be teaching, at a university or something like that?
Depends on the project. If they're, because it again, it can vary through the term. If it's easier, if it just happens to line up where they're requesting you during what would be our summertime period, that's one thing, but it's not always the case. We've had where they're looking for someone to start on the first semester for their program, so say September, to do that chunk of time. So it's really, that's where it's kind of a dance where you'd have to negotiate or work with them on time frames. So even though there's that initial engagement, the feasibility of it, working for both sides has to get worked out.
And I apologize if you said, but how far in advance do they sort of notifications for those?
Well, when you, as soon as you receive the selection notifications, that's within 1 month of the application for the specialist program, you're immediately eligible to get called up for a project with an institution. So it can be immediately, it can vary depending on who's looking for your area of expertise. So if you know that it's a very up and coming field that's being developed very rapidly and that everyone's jumping the bandwagon to get on board with, then you may have it where you're getting 3 or 4 queries immediately after getting your selection letter. And we've had folks that literally got their selection letter and within 2 weeks, they're ready to go out in the field. So it can vary.
Are they usually not like teaching? Because some of the core ones are like, they're regular teaching, right? Are the specialist ones usually more targeted projects like research learning?
Yes.
That kind of thing?
The majority, yes. But there are workshops, particularly you could be more of a guest lecturer for a shorter stint of time. But research is definitely, I think, more involved with the specialist program.
I just want to add that I was actually accepted or approved for the month of October, like our October coming up. And so I thought, well, I don't know how, I had 3 weeks notice for the month of October. And I thought, I really want to make this work, but I don't know if it's possible. And they were able to go back within 4 days and change it to another month. But what I did in the meantime was look at the academic calendar in China and line it up and make that recommendation. And they went through all the hoops and within a few weeks came back and approved me for June, and I was so relieved.
We have an internal joke on our side, what we call a specialist program, we're calling it rapid response. So that means we have to hustle on both sides to get your visa and make sure everything's squared away. It's not as painful because, again, that's why it's a 6-week cutoff, because most countries after 6 weeks, then it gets more burdensome with paperwork. But I think it's an excellent program to have as a highlight, something to augment from the core.
So in the specialist, you don't select the country or the institution. You just put out the area of competence and somebody selects you.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be ready to go.
And it's fun because you get to see or think about project proposals you never would have thought of, you didn't know an institution was doing, or who's working on what. So it's kind of neat if you're still figuring out who's who in the area that you're working in.
Is it not cool to sort of decline? In other words, if you put your name in the hat for anything, and then someone picks you, is there an expectation that you would work something out, or is it the sort of thing where they pick you and it doesn't work out for you to go with someone else?
There's this expectation that you would communicate and try to work out, but if it's not possible, then they can move on to another candidate. It's a way we're looking at accommodating both sides, right? So the institutions, this is their way if they don't otherwise have the capacity to support full-on international faculty. This is how they can get the U.S. government to provide support in a short-term way. So it's for them, it's especially if they don't have faculty that are engaged internationally yet. This is how they can bring it to them. So.
About the grant by which we can invite scholars from abroad, can you say something about that? So how does it work? Yeah.
So the visiting scholar side, they have to do exactly almost like what we're doing here in the U.S. side. They have to apply through their country. So it would be through the U.S. Embassy or the Commission. And you can invite them. You're a host institution here, and invite them to come and do research as well. And so they go through the review process. So same thing but inverse.
Academic? They need to be academic, or they can be experts?
It depends on the country. The majority are research activities supported for visiting scholars, but it depends on that particular country when they do a call. We have a lot now in the applied professional fields, such as journalism and the legal profession, where we're getting exceptions for non-academics to come. But for the most part, it's academics.
And just let me mention, we have an internal program as well for J1 visas, exchange visitors. The key difference is if they're selected on the Fulbright program, they receive a grant from the State Department to subsidize the cost of coming here. Our internal program, we don't have that kind of funding, but often they can get funded from their home institution, or sometimes a combination between their home institution and funds that you may have under your grant.
Right.
So if you're interested in that, I'll give you my card and you can check out our website and see what we got going on. All right, yep.
That's great. So who's going to apply this year? Or try? Who's going to attempt? Who's going to make the attempt, the jump? Who's going to call me? So you feel free. I have a business card in the back, I believe, or I'll put mine back there, and there's some other materials, just general overviews of both the U.S. and visiting programs. So feel free to take them. But again, don't be afraid to call us. I think it's always the most helpful to speak one-on-one about a particular country, since there can be a lot of nuances beyond the written catalog. Good? Do not be deterred. Thank you.